Levi was barely 17 when his courage crumbled under his family's wrath, a single confession shattering everything he'd known. He stood in their cramped living room, palms sweaty, voice quaking as he admitted, "I'm gay," expecting maybe a flicker of love, a chance to explain. Instead, his mother's face hardened, her eyes flashing with disgust. "You're no son of mine," she snapped, her words slicing through him like shards of glass. His father stepped forward, broad shoulders filling the doorway, his voice a low growl. "Get out! We don't shelter trash in this house." Rain pounded outside, a storm swelling as if the sky itself wept for what was coming. Levi turned to his uncle, his cousins, the relatives gathered around the flickering TV, their Sunday ritual now a tribunal. They stared at the floor, hands clasped, mouths shut, abandoning him to the flood of his parents' rage. He bolted to his room, breath ragged, fumbling to pack a backpack with trembling hands, a hoodie, a pair of jeans, a worn notebook. His mother stormed in behind him, snatching a framed photo from the wall, his smiling face at 10. "You're dead to us now," she said, her voice breaking, yet resolute, tearing the picture in half. His father grabbed his arm, dragging him to the door, shoving him into the night, rain drenching him in seconds, cold and relentless. Levi begged, "Please, just hear me out." His plea swallowed by the wind as the door slammed shut, the bolt sliding into place with a sound that rang in his ears. He lingered on the porch, soaked, staring at the house, waiting for someone to crack it open, to call him back, but the windows stayed dark, the silence louder than the thunder. Levi trudged through the storm, streets slick and empty, water streaming down his face, mixing with tears he couldn't hold back. He found a temporary home, a shelter with damp walls and creaking cots, a fleeting refuge until the beds filled up and he was out again. Soon he was truly homeless, sleeping under a tarp in an alley, hunger clawing at his insides, the city's hum indifferent to his quiet sobs. He'd sit against brick walls, replaying his mother's venom, his father's shove, his uncle's cowardice, wondering why being himself had cost him everything. The rain kept coming those first weeks, a cruel mirror to that night, stripping away the boy who'd once felt safe, leaving a shell clinging to life. That rejection carved Levi hollow, a wound too fresh to heal. He was just a kid, cast out with nothing but a soggy bag and a heart bruised beyond recognition. Yet in that bleakness, a tiny ember glowed, a stubborn whisper that he wasn't finished. Not yet. He didn't know how he'd make it, didn't know where the next meal would come from, but he'd survive, if only to defy the voices that had thrown him away. If Levi's story stings your soul, stay with us. Hit that like, share this with someone who's been there, and subscribe to Heartstories. Tap that bell for more raw tales of survival. Levi had been scraping by on the streets for months, his body a frail frame, battered by endless nights and hollow days, when a fierce rainstorm ambushed him one late autumn evening. He'd been walking for hours, boots squelching with every step, the cold seeping into his joints, his breath a faint mist in the dim light. He'd searched for shelter, a dry nook, anything to escape the downpour, but his strength gave out. He slumped outside a small cafe, its golden glow piercing the wet dusk, a warmth he felt too shattered to touch. Rain streamed from his hood, pulling around his knees as he leaned against the rough brick, too weary to stand, his stomach a tight knot, his fingers numb from clutching a soggy bag. The door creaked open, and a man stepped into the drizzle, broad and sturdy, his graying hair damp, his face etched with lines of a life lived alone. Daniel was his name, the cafe's owner, a quiet figure who'd seen enough hardship to know it when it fell at his feet. Daniel didn't pause or turn away, didn't offer the cold dismissal Levi had grown used to. He knelt beside him, rain spotting his worn jacket, voice low but solid. "You'll freeze out here, kid. Come inside." Levi braced himself, expecting a catch, a gruff order to scram, but Daniel's hand reached out, rough from years of work, steady despite the chill. Levi took it, legs trembling as he rose, and staggered into the cafe, the heat wrapping around him like a memory he'd buried deep. The place smelled of roasted coffee beans, cinnamon rolls, a hint of butter lingering in the air, its wooden tables scuffed but polished. Chairs tucked neatly, a soft murmur of life cutting through the storm's howl. Daniel set a mug of broth in front of him, steam curling upward. "Drink this, it'll warm you," he said, his tone plain, no pity, no pressure. Levi gripped it, hands quivering, the warmth seeping into his palms, thawing a coldness that had settled in his soul. Since that night, his family locked him out. Levi lingered there, unsure why, perhaps because the streets offered nothing but more rain. Daniel didn't hover, didn't dig for answers, just moved through his work with a calm that felt strange to Levi, almost unsettling in its simplicity. A few nights later, as the rain pounded the windows again, Daniel slid a rag across the counter. "Dishes need washing if you're willing. It's not fancy, but it's steady." Levi nodded, a lump in his throat, the offer striking him harder than he'd admit. He started that night, standing over the sink, hot water splashing his wrists, scrubbing pots until his fingers wrinkled, the task simple yet anchoring. Daniel worked nearby, flipping pancakes on the griddle, pouring coffee into chipped mugs, his presence a quiet constant. After days of silence, he spoke again, voice blending with the clatter. "You don't have to say where you've been if it's too raw. In here, everyone gets a chance, no strings." Levi stopped, rag dripping, those words sinking into him, a kindness he hadn't felt since he'd lost his home, a lifeline he clutched with both hands. The calf grew into a sanctuary, a place Levi returned to each day, drawn by something he couldn't name. Daniel cleared a corner in the storeroom, a narrow space with a cot, a thin blanket, a lamp that buzzed faintly. Better than the soggy alleys he'd known. At night, he'd lie there, listening to the rain tap the roof, Daniel locking up downstairs, the jingle of keys a strange comfort. His chest still ached, the sting of rejection a dull pulse, but it eased just a fraction in this borrowed warmth. Daniel showed him small things, how to stack mugs without toppling them, how to sweep the floor clean, his patience steady, unwavering. Levi didn't say much, words stuck somewhere deep, but he showed up, washed dishes, wiped tables, let the routine stitch him together, thread by fragile thread. Daniel wasn't a talker, didn't wear his heart loud. He was a man who'd lived alone too long, who carried his own quiet burdens, who saw in Levi something worth lifting up. To Levi, he was a puzzle, a rock in a life that had crumbled to dust. That calf, with its warm walls, its soft clinks of cups, became the first place Levi felt a flicker of belonging since his family's door slammed shut. He was still cracked, still wary, but Daniel's trust, his offer of work, his refusal to judge, sparked a whisper of hope Levi hadn't dared feel. It wasn't a full life yet, not even close, but it was a start, a toehold on a cliff he'd nearly fallen from. Levi woke each morning to the hum of the calf, the clatter of cups, and the hiss of the coffee machine pulling him from restless sleep. He'd been there for months now. The storeroom caught his unsteady anchor, Daniel's quiet kindness, a thread holding him together. He started as a dishwasher, hands raw from scrubbing, but Daniel saw more in him than a kid down on his luck. One slow afternoon, with rain tapping the windows, Daniel handed him a towel. "Wipe down the espresso machine. Watch how I do it." Levi followed, hesitant at first, fingers fumbling over the knobs. But Daniel stood close, showing him how to steam milk, how to grind beans just right, his voice patient, steady, like he had all the time in the world. Levi listened, absorbed, the work filling a void he hadn't named. Days turned to weeks, and Levi grew into the role, his hands finding a rhythm behind the counter. He learned to pull shots, froth cream, craft lattes with a swirl Daniel praised with a rare nod. The calf became his proving ground, a place where he could stand tall, not just survive. Daniel taught him more, how to chop onions without crying, how to simmer soup until it warmed the soul, skills Levi soaked up like dry earth after rain. He'd watch Daniel move through the kitchen, flipping eggs, stirring pots, a quiet grace in every motion, and see a father he'd never had, not the one who'd shoved him out, but one who built instead of broke. Daniel didn't coddle him, didn't ask about the past, just handed him a spatula one day. "Try it, you've got steady hands." Levi did, flipping his first pancake, a small victory that felt bigger than it should. Levi started to soften, the edges of his hurt dulling under the calf's warm roof. He'd catch himself smiling at customers, Regulars who'd nod back, their faces familiar, their orders memorized. He wasn't the boy shivering in alleys anymore. He was someone who could pour coffee, crack a joke, keep the place running when Daniel stepped out. The trust Daniel gave him, unspoken but real, cracked open a door inside Levi he'd kept locked. One night after closing, he sat at the counter, a borrowed laptop in front of him, Daniel wiping tables nearby. He'd been thinking about it for weeks, the words piling up, the weight of his story begging to breathe. He opened a recording app, voice low, shaky. I was 17 when my family threw me out for being gay. He kept going, spilling the rain, the streets, the calf, not using his name, just a voice for others like him. He uploaded it, a rough cut called Starting Over, and waited, heart pounding. The response came slow, then fast. Messages from strangers who'd been kicked out too, who'd lost homes, who'd found ways to stand again. Levi read them, eyes stinging, each one a mirror to his own fight. He kept recording, weekly, his voice growing steadier, sharing how he'd learned to brew coffee, to cook, to trust again, all without saying who he was. Daniel caught him at it once, earbuds dangling, and just nodded. Good you're talking, kid, even if it's not to me. Levi smiled, faint but real, the calf's hum a backdrop to his words. His channel grew, a quiet corner online where people found solace, where he could be raw without being seen. He didn't chase fame, didn't want it, just needed to let the pain out, to turn it into something that didn't crush him. Daniel became more than a boss, a steady figure who filled a gap Levi hadn't known could mend. He'd sit with him after hours, sharing coffee, showing him how to balance the books, how to order supplies, his lessons practical but laced with care. Levi watched him, saw a man who'd weathered his own storms, who didn't need to say it for Levi to feel it. He started to see himself differently, not as the kid his family discarded, but as someone who could build, who could learn, who could matter. The calf wasn't just a job, it was a forge, shaping him from the wreckage of that rainy night. He'd stir soup, pour espresso, record his story, each act a step up from the ashes, a quiet rebirth he hadn't planned. Levi wasn't whole yet, not by a long shot, but he was rising piece by jagged piece. He'd found a craft, a voice, a man who saw him when no one else did. The hurt still lingered, a shadow he couldn't shake, but it didn't own him anymore. He was learning to live, to trust, to speak, and that was more than he'd ever thought possible. Levi had settled into the calf's rhythm after years, his hands deft behind the counter, his voice steady on his growing channel, a quiet life built from scraps of resilience. He was 22 now, no longer the boy who'd collapsed in the rain, but a man shaped by Daniel's lessons and his own grit. The calf felt like his, not in name but in spirit, its wooden floors worn smooth by his steps, its coffee stains a map of his days. One slow morning, with the air thick from a summer heat wave, Levi took on a task he'd avoided, cleaning out Daniel's cluttered storeroom. He'd been putting it off, content with his cot and lamp, but Daniel had asked, might find something useful in there, with a shrug that hid more than it showed. Levi agreed, pulling open drawers, sifting through old receipts, dusty mugs, a life packed into forgotten corners. He found the photo tucked inside a tin box, buried under faded menus, its edges curled from time. He lifted it, dust brushing off, and froze. It was his family, a snapshot from a decade ago. His parents stiff in Sunday best, his uncle grinning beside them, a younger Levi in the foreground, gap-toothed and small. His chest tightened, breath catching as memories flooded back. The living room, the rain, the door slamming shut. He flipped it over, saw a scribbled date, a note in a hand he didn't know. Summer '05 with Jay. He stared, mind racing, until Daniel's footsteps broke the silence. Levi turned, holding the photo up, voice tight. What's this? Daniel stopped, eyes flickering with something heavy, regret maybe, or guilt. He took a slow breath. I should have told you sooner, he said, voice low, rough with years unspoken. Daniel sat on a crate, the storeroom dim around them, and let the truth spill out. He'd loved Levi's Uncle James back when Levi was just a kid running through their yard. They'd met in secret, stolen moments in a town that wouldn't bend, a love that bloomed quiet but fierce, Levi's family found out, his parents leading the charge. Their faith a hammer that smashed it apart. They'd forced James to end it, threatened to cut him off, to shun him like they later would Levi. Daniel walked away, heartbroken, swearing off the family he'd once been tied to. He'd seen Levi as a child, a bright boy with a laugh that stuck with him. But after the split, he kept his distance, believing Levi would hate him too, a remnant of a past they'd all buried. "I never thought I'd see you again," Daniel said, eyes on the floor. "Not like this." Levi listened, the photo trembling in his hands, a puzzle clicking into place. He'd never known, never suspected. His uncle's silence that night now sharper, a wound reopened. He didn't speak, just sat with it, the weight of a love lost before he'd even understood his own. Days passed, the revelations simmering, until one afternoon the cafe door jingled and a familiar figure stepped in. It was James, older now, hair thinning, eyes scanning the room unaware. He ordered a coffee, voice gruff, casual, not recognizing the man behind the counter. Levi poured it, hands steady but heart pounding, watching his uncle settle at a table, oblivious. He waited, then walked over, setting the mug down, locking eyes with him. James blinked, confusion turning to shock. "Levi? Is that you?" His voice faltered, a mix of disbelief and something softer. Buried deep, Levi stood there, years of hurt swirling in his chest, but his face stayed calm, a mask he'd learned to wear. "It's me," he said, voice even, "the kid you all watched walk out, if you still remember." James flinched, mug untouched, his mouth opening, then closing, words failing him. Levi didn't push, didn't yell, just let the silence stretch, heavy with everything unsaid. James looked down, hands fidgeting. "I didn't know you'd end up here," he muttered, weak, a half-truth Levi didn't buy. He smiled, faint, bitter. "Funny how life works, right?" He turned back to the counter, leaving James with his coffee, the air thick with a past neither could undo. That moment lingered, a thread from his old life tugging at the new one he'd built. Levi didn't hate James, not fully, but he didn't trust him either. The photo stayed in his pocket, a quiet reminder of what family had cost him and what Daniel had given back. He kept pouring coffee, kept recording, kept moving, but the encounter left a mark, a question he couldn't shake. Levi stood behind the counter of Chosen Family Café, his own place now, a dream carved from years of grit and Daniel's unshakable faith in him. He was 25, the café a small brick haven on a bustling street, its name painted in bold letters above the door. Daniel had helped him start it, pooling savings, teaching him the ropes, a quiet partner in a venture that meant more than coffee. The space buzzed with life, tables filled with people who'd been cast out like him, LGBTQ+ souls finding warmth in mismatched chairs and steaming mugs. Levi poured espresso, flipped pancakes, his hands sure, his smile genuine. The cafe's mission clear, a refuge for those rejected, a home for the lost. Word spread fast, articles popping up online, locals calling it a beacon, its story of love over hate striking a chord far beyond the city. The café wasn't just a business, it was Levi's heart poured into every cup, every plate. He'd built it for the kids who'd slept on streets, for the ones who'd heard, "You're not enough," too many times. Regulars came with tales of their own, a trans teen kicked out at 16, a man shunned by his church, their voices blending with his own on the channel he still ran. It grew louder now, his story no longer anonymous, his name tied to the café's rise. He didn't hide anymore, didn't need to. The pain of his past, a fuel that lit this new fire. Daniel watched from the sidelines, pride in his eyes, a father figure who'd given Levi wings when his own family clipped them. The success felt real, tangible, a victory he'd earned through sweat and stubborn hope. One crisp morning, the door jingled and a familiar figure stepped in, hesitant, older now, her coat worn thin. It was his mother, her face softer, lined with years and something like remorse. She stood by the counter, hands clasped, voice small. "Levi, I'm sorry for everything." Tears welled in her eyes, a quiet plea in the way she looked at him, but Levi didn't rush to her side. He set down a mug, met her gaze. "I don't need the past to come back. I've made my own future here." His words weren't cruel, just firm, a line drawn by a man who'd learned to stand without her. She nodded, wiping her face. "I just wanted you to know," she whispered, then left, the door closing soft behind her. Levi watched her go, chest tight, forgiveness there but distant, a gift he gave himself, not her. He kept building, kept pouring his soul into the cafe, its walls echoing with laughter, stories, second chances. At a fundraiser one night, he took the mic, voice clear. "I was 17 when my family turned their backs. I didn't let that define me. Family isn't who births you, it's who stays when you're at your weakest." The crowd hushed, then clapped, his truth ringing out, a testament to the life he'd forged. He'd lost a mother, a father, an uncle, but found Daniel, found these strangers who filled his tables, found a purpose that outshone the pain. He wasn't going back, not to that house, not to those voices, his path forward lit by the family he'd chosen. Levi's calf stood as proof he'd risen above, a man who'd turned rejection into strength, who'd built a home where others couldn't tear it down. He walked its floors each day, a quiet pride in his step, free not because they'd let him go, but because he'd let them. The past was a shadow, faint now, powerless against the light he'd made. Who's been your rock when family wasn't? Tell us below. If Levi's fight lifts your spirit, hit that like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Heartstories. We're here for the real ones. Join us. Tap that bell.